Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I think I've got over the fire, I've got over losing everything, but now we want to get on with our lives.
House insurance nightmare, an unsettled claim, now a lawsuit, 5 years after a devastating fire. Also,
there was a gentleman hollering at me to get out of the house quickly.
Homicide investigators probe a deadly house fire in Langley. And
the whole phase thing is, it's more of a dimmer switch.
When to expect BC's next phase of reopening.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. We begin tonight in East Vancouver with a house insurance horror story.
It began 5 years ago when a fire, touched off by a firework, destroyed a brother and sister's century-old home. Next,
a permit backlog delaying their ability to rebuild for more than 2 years.
Then, as Belpuri of CBC's Impact Team reports, more bad news from their insurance company, who they are now battling in court.
Siblings Patricia and Bruce Mitchell have decades of memories made in this house, but now it's tough for them to look at it. When flames roared through the duplex late one night just before Halloween a few years ago, Bruce Mitchell was trapped and had to be rescued from a balcony. The careless use of fireworks was likely the cause.
I've got over the fire, I've got over losing everything, but now we want to get on with our lives.
Nearly 5 years later, the two are stuck in a fight with their insurance company. The Mitchells wanted to rebuild. To that end, the 105-year-old house would have to be upgraded to meet modern-day bylaws. Those costs are not covered by insurance. In court documents, the Mitchells maintain Intact Insurance failed to communicate with them in a timely fashion exactly how much they'd have to pay over and above the insurance settlement.
It started out at $100,000 on the Monday. It blossomed to $250,000 by the Wednesday. By the end of the week, it was over $500,000.
The pair didn't have $500,000, so decided not to rebuild and to opt for a cash settlement instead. The Mitchells were shocked by what the insurance company told them next. It had already spent a big chunk of their money on assessing and securing the house over the years. What was coming to them was simply what's left over. From $750,000, they're down to just over $400,000. Intact Insurance says older homes can be complex and not everything is immediately apparent. The issues in question, it says, were discovered after further due diligence from the city and unfortunately after the restoration process began.
This $300,000 amount relates primarily to securing the property for 2.5 years. Some selective demolition and abatement, but the actual rebuild did not start. And my clients are being told that they're already $300,000 in the hole.
Shortly after that news, the Mitchells sold the house. And on this day, a chance meeting with the new owner.
Oh, that's ridiculous. That foundation is maximum $60,000.
He's a developer, restoring the house for what he says is nowhere near the price tag the Mitchells were told it would cost.
So what they say you'd pay extra, I have done the entire house. So it's not accurate.
The matter is scheduled to go to trial next spring. In the meantime, Intact is now also not releasing the portion of money not in dispute.
Now that's the hardest part.
The home is being built just the way the Mitchells planned, except it's not their home anymore. Belpuri, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, the summer may be approaching and more businesses may be reopening, but BC's top doctor says everyone must stay careful against COVID-19.
But people are, of course, eager, and Dr. Bonnie Henry fielded many questions today about when BC might move to the next phase. Dan
Barrett here live with the latest. Dan, we have 36 new cases over a 3-day period and no new deaths, but Dr. Henry is still urging caution.
Indeed, and now summer weather does eventually arrive in BC. More people will want to get out and about, see more of their friends and family, just do more. And while restaurants and other services have reopened, we're not flipping over to phase 3 like an on-off toggle. Dr. Henry, as we heard, says it's more of a dimmer switch. Dr. Henry says she spent much of her weekend looking at where people get infected and where we're most at risk. She says it's at events important to us, choir practices, church, birthdays, weddings, funerals, even nightclubs. As we've heard before, she says it's easier to get COVID-19 indoors than outdoors. She says they are not budging on the limit of 50 people per gathering. She says at that number, if someone brings coronavirus into a group, they can probably find them pretty quickly and control that spread. So as more people expand their bubbles, travel, and plan events this summer, she has some specific advice for all of us.
Have the ability to have physical space between people so that family units can be together, but you have the ability to separate out from others. You want to make it really easy for people who are more likely to have severe illness, to get very sick or to die from this, to attend in a virtual way. If you're doing dancing, you need to do it with your own small group and then have small groups that are physically separated.
Now, last week, Henry said she was hopeful BC's next phase of pandemic response could begin later in this month or July, but that hinges on new cases. She was asked today if we were getting to stage 3 this week. Henry says maybe. She doesn't want people to think moving to another phase means we can ease off on distancing and washing our hands. Anita, Mike?
We'll have to draw circles on the ground for people to dance inside. Dan, thank you. Homicide investigators are now at the scene of Saturday's deadly house fire in Langley.
There are still few details about the 3 people who died, but one of the deaths is being called suspicious.
As Eva Ugwensenge reports, neighbors are now shocked at how quickly the fire spread.
It was quick. You just see the windows start popping and then the fire was shooting out of it.
Witnesses say the house was engulfed in flames in a matter of minutes. The heat felt by neighbors from across the street. Some used a ladder to rescue a man hanging from a second-story window.
I grabbed my landlord and my other roommate, grabbed the ladder and ran it over. There's some guy hanging out of the top story window there, and helped him down, and I saw they dragged the one fellow out in the side there.
More than 24 firefighters worked to extinguish it before it spread to 2 neighboring houses. In the aftermath, police say 3 bodies were found.
I saw a man laying on my lawn that appeared to be deceased. And there was a gentleman hollering at me to get out of the house quickly, so I grabbed my walker and cell phone and keys and went outside, and I noticed all the black smoke coming from the neighbor's house.
Police say the man on the lawn was found dead and that his death appeared suspicious. The 2 other bodies were still inside the Chart house as of this afternoon. The Integrated Homicide Investigation Team has taken charge of the investigation.
We could potentially be looking at 3 homicides. We just don't know that at this point.
The house was so badly damaged, police weren't able to take custody of the 2 bodies until Monday. IHIT says none of the 3 victims have been identified and couldn't confirm whether they were all living at the house. The 4th person who escaped unharmed was questioned by police before being released.
So there was a person inside the home that was taken outside the home who's alive, who we've spoken to at length. Now, the investigation is still early. There hasn't been any charges with respect to what happened at the home.
The woman who lives next door says she met the couple who rented the house a few times. They were in their 50s and had a son she believes was around 20 years old.
They were quiet. They were always seemed to be working to keep the house up and, and shoveling snow, washing the driveway, planting plants. They seemed like the ideal tenants.
She says she's not sure if their son still lived with them at the time of the fire, but she believes there was a 3rd tenant living in part of the house. Eva Ugwensenge, CBC News, Langley.
Some tent city residents living near Vancouver's Crab Park have packed up and moved on after being told to do so. They didn't go far, though. They've moved about 20 meters away. Overnight, about 60 to 80 tent city campers worked to move people, tents, and structures to a gravel parking lot. The BC Supreme Court injunction allows the Vancouver Port Authority to evict illegal campers. Around 100 people moved to the parking lot near the park at the beginning of May after Oppenheimer was closed. The gravel lot they are now on is also owned by the Port Authority, and the injunction is valid until June 25th.
7 people were arrested this morning when police moved in on anti-racism protesters blocking the viaducts in and out of Vancouver.
If you do not move off the roadway, you will be subject to arrest.
Protesters showing solidarity for Black Lives Matter were blocking the Georgia and Dunsmuir viaducts since Saturday morning. They say they were also there to honor the Black community displaced when the viaducts were built. Almost 100 demonstrators cooperated with police and left the area peacefully. City crews and Vancouver Police got the area cleaned up and traffic was moving again by 9 a.m. Those arrested are facing mischief and intimidation charges.
TransLink is handing out 15,000 masks to riders in an effort to make sure face coverings are top of mind for commuters. The free non-medical grade masks are branded with TransLink's blue T logo. Posters and decals are now posted throughout the transit system reminding riders wearing is caring. TransLink is asking all passengers to wear a mask while taking transit or waiting for a bus or SkyTrain.
More help is on the way for young people in BC struggling with mental health issues and substance abuse. The province announcing 8 new Foundry youth centers today. The centers offer youth phone video and walk-in access to counselors. Supports for mental health, substance use, and social services are available to young people aged 12 to 24.
This is a big win for youth and families who will be able to access these services in their own communities, close to home and close to family and friends.
The province recorded more than 35,000 visits to the centers last year. Today's announcement brings the total to 19 Foundries operating in communities across the province.
Waterlogged northeastern BC is about to get hammered again with wet weather, and that's raising concerns about flooding. Rainfall warnings are in place for North Peace River and Fort Nelson. Those areas have already recorded up to 80 millimeters of rain from the persistent system. Environment Canada says it's the same one that's hammered northern Alberta, Dawson Creek, and the surrounding communities. The further 15 to 20 millimeters of rain today has resulted in the River Forecast Centre issuing high stream flow advisories. The Upper Fraser, North Rockies, Liard, and the Peace are all included.
Brett Soderholm, meteorologist, is here now. There's a lot of precipitation, certainly in those areas we just saw. Well, in fact, a lot of precipitation in most parts of the province.
Yeah, you can say confidently that province-wide we've been dealing with a lot of rain, and interestingly enough, there's now actually the concern for a little bit of snow in places as well. But I do want to go back to that northeast region just to give you a better picture visually about what we're expecting over the next 24 hours. If you take a look at this morning, just to see where it extends, so just north of Dawson Creek all the way up to Fort Nelson, as we did here, yeah, additional 10 to 20 millimeters is possible throughout the overnight period into tomorrow. And I was just looking, some communities have reported over 90 millimeters of rain. But if we go farther south, I know this is going to be a little bit tough for people to kind of stomach at this point, but there is the risk for some wet snow on the Okanagan connector overnight tonight. That's Highway 97C. Anything above 1,600 meters is fair game for the transition for rain to go over into wet snow. So if you know of anyone that is traveling that route tonight, or if you yourself are considering that, please take some extra precautions there. But over here on the south coast, temperatures still the story. It only got up to 14 degrees as our high today. These are temperatures we would normally expect in March, not in the middle of June, and it's all thanks to that persistent rain that's been over us and is still falling over us, as I should say, at this point in time. But I am here to say there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel after the risk for showers will ease throughout this evening. By tomorrow, we should be dealing with much sunnier conditions, and I'll have that full forecast for you when I come back.
We will await your light and your tunnel. We appreciate that. Thanks, Brett. Talk to you in a bit. Well, a Freedom of Information request has uncovered the cost of keeping Prince Harry and Meghan Markle safe during their time here in BC. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says the RCMP spent more than $56,000 on security during their 2-month stay. Meghan and Harry shocked the world after stepping down as senior members of the royal family and announcing a move to Vancouver Island.
The couple and their son Archie moved to North Saanich in January. In March, they pulled up stakes and are now living in Los Angeles. The RCMP says the security costs are covered under their existing operational budget.
As a reminder, you can watch this newscast live on CBC Gem, the free app, also where you can find other CBC programs.
We also always like to remind you that if you want to give us a follow, you can do so on Instagram and Twitter as well.
A landmark decision from the U.S. Supreme Court protecting employees who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. What it means and why it was a surprise. Next.
Thank you for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream online. A global pandemic is not enough to keep Coogee, the Australian Labradoodle, away from the seniors she loves to visit.
Yep, her owner got creative and this went viral. Have a look.
I can see you.
You can see us. With the whole pandemic, I think it's really pushed everybody to think differently. This is Coogee. She's an 8-year-old Australian Labradoodle. Coogee, can you say hi to your friend? You say hi to your friends? Hey? So I would go to Sunnybrook every week and meet Jen downstairs, and she would come bring me up to the wing. We would visit, you know, in excess of sort of 20 different individuals. The vets that are there, both men and women. Average age is over 96, and they're amazing.
Oh, what you see is what you get.
When you realize how much is, because of COVID, how much is cut back up there, you know, their morning coffees, they're going downstairs to get something, none of that can happen. We realized that the residents weren't allowed visitors, they weren't allowed to have the volunteers come in, that really their interactions were only going to be staff. Within about a week or two, I sent Jen a note and said, what if we FaceTimed each other? Hi, Jen.
How's it going, Mo?
We are here, we're ready to go. So who are we gonna go see?
Little video visit with you, Mo, and Coogee. Coogee and Mo are on the screen here.
Hi, Georgie. We came to visit you through the screen, our little virtual visit to you.
Now, this is all very sudden and new information and new technology for the veterans, and including myself. I'm really proud of my veterans. They've really adapted well. It's been very difficult, but I think this is something different that they're allowed to see.
Oh, she's looking right at you.
Coogie's so cute.
I think you have to keep some form of normalcy through all this. You know, coming each week, there's something that the dog gives them, and it's amazing, and you see it in their faces.
Oh, she's giving me a kiss back, Georgie. That's for you. Big lick for you.
It certainly is great to have the dog in the building. Bye-bye.
Bye, doll.
Oh.
Come on. Big kisses.
I think for me, my favorite moments are when a veteran's having a bad day and they see the dog, their face lights up, and you know, you've made a moment, you've changed their day, you know, you've made them happy when they weren't happy. And I think for me, those are the favorite moments.
You made our day.
And mine.
Oh,
Okay, dear.
See you. Hey. Hey.
Mwah. The dog is going to give you a kiss.
It's time to make your voice heard. CBC British Columbia is hosting a virtual town hall to discuss racism. Unmasking Racism, June 17th at 7 p.m. Streaming on Facebook, CBC Gem, and cbc.ca/BC.
It is being seen as a resounding victory for LGBTQ rights in the United States. The Supreme Court delivered a landmark decision protecting the community from discrimination. As Katie Simpson reports, it was a surprising outcome from a conservative court.
In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that yes, in fact, a landmark law from 1964 does provide protections to the LGBT community. Essentially, the court said today that in America, in the workplace, you cannot discriminate against someone because of their gender identity or because of their sexual orientation. What might be the biggest surprise about today's decision is that a conservative judge appointed by President Donald Trump, Neil Gorsuch, he actually authored the decision by the majority. That was not anticipated by many people who are watching this decision and waiting for this decision.
Some people were surprised, but they've ruled and we live with their decision. That's what it's all about. We live with the decision of the Supreme Court. Very powerful decision, actually.
Now, of course, The pandemic is still a major problem in the United States, so the decision was announced virtually, and very few people are here at the Supreme Court right now to celebrate. But those who did come out were very enthusiastic.
I'm really happy. It's such a shift that's happened so quickly in the United States on gay rights issues. It really gives me hope for some of the other social issues that we're facing today, that we can move as quickly on those too. As a gay American, it's just shocking to me to think that in so many states around the country before today, I could still be fired for being gay.
While it's quiet around the Supreme Court right now, people we've been speaking with expect some celebrations, physically distant celebrations, may be taking part in Washington and other places where there are large members of the LGBT community. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Emotional appeals today from the family of Rashard Brooks. Brooks was a black man shot by a white police officer in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant on Friday. As Susan Ormiston tells us, Brooks' relatives don't just want justice, they want change.
How many more protests will it take to ensure that the next victim isn't your cousin, your brother?
Another family grieving after a black man was shot in the back by Atlanta police.
No one walking this green earth expects to be shot and killed like trash in the street for falling asleep in a drive-thru.
Rashard Brooks,
Oh, I'm a man.
27, was woken up by police after nodding off in his car at a Wendy's drive-thru. They talked for 20 minutes and apparently cooperatively.
Stop. Blah, 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 stop.
But Brooks failed his breathalyzer.
Here, put your hands behind your butt.
When the cuffs came out, he battled, grabbing an officer's taser and running. A security camera shows police in pursuit. Brooks pointed the taser, then turned, and an officer shot him twice in the back. A third bullet, says an attorney, hit one of the cars lined up to get a burger.
People ask, how could this have ended? Why did he resist? It could have ended there. Well, it also could have ended here. I can walk. My sister's house is right here.
Brooks had offered to park and walk. His death brought protests to the streets again today. Atlanta's mayor promised immediate reforms on deadly use of force.
We saw the worst happen on Friday night with Mr. Brooks.
As another family shouldered their loss.
We're going to have to bury him. We're going to have to say, we miss you. We got to apologize to him for not telling him that we loved him that much.
I just want y'all to know that y'all took my cousin from me.
Prosecution, if charges come, will turn on whether that deadly force was lawful and justified, given options to de-escalate that situation. President Trump is expected to sign an executive order tomorrow on police reform. No comfort for another family in Atlanta tonight. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Washington.
The mayor of Montreal admits the city has a problem with systemic racism. The issue has been under official examination, and today the result came in. As Allison Northcott shows us, so did potential fixes.
Equality should not be like pulling teeth.
A citizen-led initiative pushed the city to take a closer look at systemic racism and discrimination. 7,000 participated. Now, Montreal's public consultation office found the city turned a blind eye to the issues.
What we're saying is that if you don't know what you're fighting against, how can you effectively evaluate the actions that you're putting forward?
She says the city has taken little action around issues involving policing, racial profiling, and employment. Over a 3-year period, the report found no one who identified as a visible minority, ethnic minority, or Indigenous was hired in upper management at the City of Montreal. Among the sweeping recommendations, anti-racism training for the entire municipal civil service, a policy declaring racial and social profiling by police violate Montrealers' fundamental rights, and the top recommendation to publicly recognize the systemic nature of racism.
Systemic racism does exist.
Montreal's mayor says she will act and appoint a commissioner to counter racism.
We want to make sure there's more representation within the public servants.
Quebec's premier announced a new task force on racism, but continued to deny it's a systemic problem.
My definition of systemic racism is that there's a system in Quebec of racism. And I don't think that there's a system.
But the head of the Native Women's Shelter says the list of systemic issues facing Indigenous people in Montreal is long.
Youth protection, the hospitals, the police, the court system, right? Potentially they'll be able to address these issues because we need the help.
We need Montrealers to be reflected in our institutions.
Now many want to see action, concrete steps and ways to measure them to ensure they're actually working. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Well, a CBC News investigation into rail safety has found troubling problems involving trains carrying crude oil. Government documents show one line in Saskatchewan has particularly a bad record, and yet, as Dave Seglins tells us, the trains keep on rolling.
This is the train derailment. Right at the end of the driveway, it's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Melanie Loso couldn't believe her eyes. A CP freight train carrying crude oil derailed just steps from her family's home.
My grandchildren were crying. They were very upset.
Less than 2 months later, just kilometers away, a second train derailed.
And I was just like, oh my God, not again. You know, this is just too much.
CBC obtained government inspection reports. Over the last 5 years, Transport Canada found hundreds of problems along this track. We showed the findings to a leading rail expert.
It was pretty bad from end to end. Really bad shape, I'd say.
Naish says Transport Canada should have cracked down on CP Rail.
They didn't take any action to say, okay, guys, you got to stop operating on this line until you fix things.
CP Rail this spring is back doing major upgrades. Despite last winter's crashes, the railway says its Saskatchewan line was properly maintained. In Lac-Mégantic, 47 people died when an oil train derailed. Since then, there have been 7 more major crashes involving crude oil, all caused by track problems. Bruce Campbell wrote a book on Lac-Mégantic.
I'm concerned that the lessons of Lac-Mégantic don't seem to be taken into account. What's at stake is the safety of the public. It's people's lives.
Transport Canada insists it has a robust track oversight program, but in a statement it acknowledges track issues remain an all too common cause of main track derailments. This spring it ordered rail companies to come up with tougher standards, almost 7 years after Canada's worst ever oil train disaster. Dave Seglin, CBC News, Toronto.
2 Canadian women who say they were raped by former fashion executive Peter Nygaard are telling their stories publicly tonight for the first time. Nygaard is named in a class action lawsuit in which 57 women have accused him of rape or sexual assault. Nygaard has denied those allegations and they haven't been proven in court. The Fifth Estate's Bob McEwen has more tonight and a warning to viewers. Some of the details are disturbing.
Casey Allen grew up in Winnipeg. She says she had just graduated from high school in 1979 and was 17 years old when she met Nygaard at a local nightclub.
He threw me on the bed, pinned me using his forearm across my throat, ripped off my underwear, I would have been wearing a dress, and raped me, with me fighting as hard as I could. It wasn't date rape, it wasn't, oh, come on, please, 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 no, 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 come on, come on. It was full-on, fast, brutal, physical rape.
Casey Allen didn't report that to the police at the time and didn't tell her parents. She went on to a successful modeling career, as did April Telek, a Vancouver-based model and actor, who says Nygaard raped her in 1993 in a warehouse apartment when she was asked to come to Winnipeg for a modeling job.
He exposed himself, and he flipped me around and obviously wanted to have sex with me, and I was fighting, saying no. And then I just lay there and let it happen.
Peter Nygaard has denied both those accusations of rape, saying they are part of a paid campaign to destroy his reputation. And Nygaard's lawyer has called April Telek's story that she was held captive impossible, arguing in a busy warehouse someone would have seen her. We were also sent sworn statements from the 2 Nygaard relatives April Telek says were involved. The family member she says picked her up at the airport swears she wasn't even in the country at the time. And the Nygaard relative who acknowledges he picked April up at the warehouse insists he saw no indication that she'd been raped.
I want him to go to jail. I want him to pay for what he did, and then maybe he'll go away for good.
I'm enraged by the fact it took a civil lawsuit to gain the attention of authorities. No, I would rather not be part of a class action suit. I'd rather be on the witness stand, sending that man to jail.
Bob McEwen, CBC News, Toronto.
Workers of a national company are blowing the whistle on their employer, saying they were pressured into doing things against labor laws. As Roswell Marcatelli with Go Public explains, experts say it's one of many cases where companies are being accused of breaking the rules to save money during this pandemic.
I will do whatever I can.
The message was delivered in April, and it came from the big boss in this internal company video.
I'm asking everyone to work a full week and to record an additional 8 hours of vacation onto your timesheet every week in April and May. This reduces our compensation costs and permits us to avoid mass layoffs.
That's Franklin Holt-Forster, the CEO of Colliers Project Leaders. It's a high-profile company that's received hundreds of millions of dollars worth of government infrastructure contracts over the years. He's asking employees to give up paid vacation days and falsify time cards or risk job losses during the pandemic.
If we all surrender a bit of future vacation, we can keep our coworkers and ourselves employed.
He said it was voluntary. We spoke with employees who didn't see it that way. CBC agreed not to identify them because they said it could jeopardize their employment. Someone else is reading their words.
There's so much fear that if you don't do this, you're going to lose your job.
I know a lot of my colleagues are struggling. Any colleagues that haven't been here a year are now in the negative with their vacation time. I felt that is absolutely unacceptable.
Reducing the number of paid vacation days required by law and falsifying time cards is unethical and illegal, say lawyers. The pandemic has been tough on Canadian workers, and abuses are common, says this attorney.
What I'm seeing is that employers have quickly and simply forgotten about employee rights. It is a constructive dismissal law to cut salaries, to take away vacation time, to lay people off in most provinces in Canada. And yet they're doing it willy-nilly.
After hearing from Go Public, Colliers Project Leaders apologized, saying it would reinstate the vacation days. Despite this initiative being implemented with the best of intentions, the company said, we understand that some employees felt pressure to participate and wound up working during their time off. That's not what was intended. The company also said it tried to cut costs in other ways, but it wasn't enough after it saw a huge decline in revenue and the prospect of layoffs loomed. Rosa Marcatelli, CBC News, Calgary.
Well, out of sight and behind factory walls, how BC manufacturers are coping with COVID-19. We take you inside those factories, making your beloved must-haves after the break.
With Sheldon Turcotte.
A long simmering labor dispute has finally brought bus service in Vancouver and Victoria to a halt. The bus drivers say they've been locked out. Management says the bus drivers are on strike. And the only thing both sides agree on is that the strike, or lockout, could be a long one. Jerry Thompson reports.
BC Transit drivers have done everything they could to keep the public on their side. At 4 o'clock this morning, they showed up for work as usual, but refused to sign new worksheets that would mean a cutback in bus service. Instead, they signed their old worksheets, but were told they would not be paid for the old schedule.
We're just confirming that we're locked out, and the same situation has already taken place in the Kensington garage.
The dispute involves wages, cutbacks in bus service, and the use of part-time drivers. The union has been working without a contract for 15 months.
Bring your sleeping bag too, Neil.
The union considers this a lockout. Management calls it a strike. The doors have indeed been locked. The BC transit system has been shut down, and one driver even lit a Roman candle at sunrise to signify the start of what may be a long dispute. Oddly enough, the morning rush hour in Vancouver was not much heavier than usual, perhaps because the public had so much warning about the shutdown and made other plans. Parking lots were full, but aside from that, no problems. Everyone knew about the dispute because of the union's ingenious way of battling management without making the public angry at the drivers. Several months ago, they launched what they called the unstrike, refusing to wear uniforms. Then they put financial pressure on management by accepting IOUs instead of cash at the fare box. And finally, they staged a series of rotating shutdowns, pulling the buses to the side of the road for an hour at a time. And the strategy seemed to work. Riders were not angry at the drivers.
I'm all for it. I think it's great. It's about time they did something. They've been without a contract for so long.
But now push has come to shove. Management says the union's position is unreasonable and unaffordable.
The union at this time has to come off of what we feel was a very inflexible position.
So the unstrike is a full-scale shutdown, and union and management are not talking to each other. Jerry Thompson, CBC News, Vancouver.
Some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
And it started out at $100,000 on the Monday. It blossomed to $250 by the Wednesday. By the end of the week, it was over $500,000.
Fire destroyed their East Vancouver home. That was 5 years ago. Now a brother and sister are suing their house insurance provider, saying long delays depleted their claim. The lawsuit alleged Intact Insurance refused to pay a significant portion of their $740,000 claim, citing costs that accumulated over the 2.5 years that it took adjusters to assess the situation.
They tried for a long time to revive him, and they were unsuccessful.
3 people are dead after a house fire in Langley, and now the homicide team is involved as the deaths are being considered suspicious. Police say the injuries of one of the men are consistent with homicide. The cause of the fire has yet to be determined.
So I don't want to give people the impression that what we're saying is if we go to phase 3, that suddenly we don't have to do the same things that we need to do. And that speaks to the concern about complacency.
Emphasizing even if we move to phase 3, physical distancing will continue until a vaccine is out. It's not clear, though, when things could actually start to open up even more. Since Friday, there have been 36 more cases of COVID-19 in BC, but no new deaths.
Well, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the absence of open storefronts and restaurants have been some of the most visible impacts the outbreak has had on business.
But out of sight and behind factory walls, a lot of BC manufacturers have been coping with their own challenges.
And as Ian Hannamansing shows us, the changing guidelines are just some of the problems.
Amid the bright colors and fragrant bath products, this factory in Vancouver is a good example of how Canada's manufacturing sector is working through a pandemic. And like so much else in our lives, they're relying on physical distancing and faith. In this case, that workers will be safe and customers will come back. When Lush Cosmetics shut down its stores across North America in March, this plant closed as well. But as online sales started to grow, the company realized it needed a plan. Not just to reopen, but also to rethink production. Perhaps the biggest change, creating more space between workers.
That means that we've really reduced the number of staff that we have working in any one room. In a room of this size, you would typically have 20 to 25 people working in a day. And right now, as you can see, we have about 6 to 8 people who are working during the shift.
Willis says Lush didn't just need to make the workplace safer from COVID, they needed to make sure their workers felt safe when they returned. Did you feel a little nervous when you first walked in?
A little bit, yeah, because it's like you come in and you're like, well, do I have to stand like how far back, or can you say hi, that sort of thing, right?
But everyone was ready to make sure everyone was more aware of their surroundings. Everyone was ensuring that everyone was keeping distance toward each other, so everyone is looking out for each other.
At Cape Hassa Chips, about a half-hour's drive away in Delta, they've been dealing with an additional COVID challenge. Not just stricter safety measures, but soaring sales as well. Things usually slow down after the Super Bowl and before summer, but not during a pandemic.
We all went and visited grocery stores and saw just shelves empty. And we said, well, we need to get our products back into stock. So our team worked really hard. They all put in extra effort, and they're able to extend the 5-day operation that we have, 24 hours a day, into a 7-day operation within 2 weeks.
Stephen says chip sales are up more than 40%. Other products from their U.S. plants are also in greater demand, but early on they had to close in Wisconsin for a few days after 3 workers tested positive for COVID-19. A reminder of what could happen if they didn't make the right changes quickly. And how many people would have been around here? 4 people. In the old days, February, workers would be crowded around this table. Now they're masked, distanced, and behind plexiglass. They're also getting a bonus, a couple of dollars more an hour. But while they're busier than usual here, the story for manufacturers across the country depends on what they make.
In some sectors, they've had a really hard time because demand fell precipitously, like aviation and auto and their whole supply chain. But in other things like consumer products and food, demand has been pretty steady. And in those cases, they've had more to deal with how to keep operating to take care of their employees.
At Lush, fewer people in the plant means lower output, but that's okay for now. Sales are about half of what they'd usually be this time of year. But as stores start to reopen, and eventually there's the holiday season, these spaces may need to be reconfigured again.
After weeks of very few COVID-19 cases, the city of Beijing in China is tackling an outbreak. There are efforts to contain a sudden outbreak coming up.
6:41, a very damp Monday night. Look across the North Shore from downtown tonight, but expecting improving conditions in the coming days. But how long will it last? We're going to put some pressure on Brett next.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC BC is hosting a digital town hall looking at the disturbing increase in racism across the province. Join in the dialogue on June 17th at 7 p.m. Learn more at cbc.ca/racism town hall. And CBC Vancouver is a proud sponsor of the Doxa Documentary Film Fest. This year it's moving online. Enjoy amazing films and digital live events from the comfort of your own home.
The weather update is brought to you by WorkSafe BC. Visit WorksafeBC.com for workplace health and safety resources, including COVID-19 prevention.
All right, it's that time to check in again with meteorologist Brett Soderholm. And Mike said we're putting the pressure on you to get rid of this rain, Brett.
I hope I don't crumble under this pressure because I can feel the weight of it. I mean, I myself am pretty well done with this rain, this January weather. I mean, I am just not particularly enjoying it. Digging into the stats, we've only had about a handful of completely dry days, and I want to show you how much rain that's amounted to here in Vancouver. If we don't include what we've seen today, we're already at 35 millimeters of rain. Normally, we'd expect about 54. So we are more than halfway through what we would expect to be getting at this time of year, and there is going to be just a little bit more to go, but I do think the worst is pretty well over at this point. What you're going to see here, just a few of these green blobs indicating that there is the potential for a few additional showers throughout the overnight period, but the heaviest rain certainly by now has already fallen, and it is going to be gradually improving. Now, you may be wondering why I'd be able to say that with a little bit of confidence, and here's why. This area of low pressure that's been dominating over BC for so long is finally going to be breaking down, and that's going to allow for a tiny little area of high pressure to finally build in across the south coast. Now, this is going to allow for clearer skies and certainly some warmer temperatures as well for the next few days, so confidence is pretty high. Now, we have been dealing with these unsettled conditions, which have led to a very low fire danger rating across the entire province, with the exception, oddly, of the Caribou region. Still a few areas there getting into that high territory, but fortunately, over the next couple of days, conditions will be improving, and we'll be seeing that rating go down. But temperatures in the north, you can see, going to be rising over the next couple of days, and down to the south as well, you'll specifically notice that into the Okanagan. And if I could issue a drum roll here, this would be about the time I'd use it, because I have been waiting for so long to show you guys a 5-day forecast with sunshine in the icon more than any rain. So for the next few days, definitely take the sunglasses out. You're going to need them. Be sun smart as well. And temperatures by the end of the week finally getting back to that 20-degree mark.
Ooh, looking good, Brett. Thanks.
Welcome news from Ottawa tonight for Canadians depending on those CERB payouts.
David Cochrane explains why federal government is planning to extend the benefit.
More than 8 million people have relied on the CERB since the country went on lockdown. But it was only designed to last 16 weeks, and for many, it's running out.
Prime Minister Trudeau needs to provide a plan.
While the CERB has been a lifeline for Canadians, the NDP has been a lifeline for the minority Liberals. But Jagmeet Singh says no extension, no more support.
We're having negotiations about the fact that the government needs to release a plan on how they're going to help Canadians in this crisis when there's no jobs to return to. So this is fundamental for us moving forward.
If you're having troubles finding a job, you shouldn't also be worrying about whether you'll hit the limit of your CERB benefits.
The Prime Minister signaled he will meet the NDP demand of an extension, with the precise details still to be worked out.
So right now, we're working on a solution to extend the benefit for people who can't return to work yet. We'll have more details later this week, but for today, I want you to know that we will continue to be there for you and your family.
This move comes with the minority Liberals facing a confidence vote in Parliament on Wednesday. Now, the opposition is unlikely to force an election in the middle of a pandemic, so this has less to do with political pressure than the fact that the economy is still sputtering and millions don't have jobs to go back to. David Cochrane, CBC News, Ottawa.
China has a new outbreak of COVID-19 after going weeks with no cases at all.
Christine Birak has more on the new outbreak that is threatening a second wave.
The outbreak is believed to have started inside this giant wholesale food market in Beijing. It's now closed, but the market's manager says the virus was traced back to a cutting board used by a retailer who sells imported salmon from Europe. It's now being pulled from all grocery store shelves. Widespread testing is underway, and parts of the city are now locked down. This resident says, "Of course I'm worried. I take the bus. I don't even want to work now." Chinese health authorities say they're still looking into the source of this infection, but not everyone's convinced that European salmon is to blame.
The origin and extent of the outbreak are being investigated.
The World Health Organization has said the virus that causes COVID-19 in humans is not known to infect aquatic food animals nor contaminate their products. If not from eating it, there's also speculation the virus hitched a ride on the packaging the fish was shipped in.
I will be reticent to be in a position where all packaging and other things would need to be systematically tested. I think we need to look at what has happened in this case. I don't believe it's the primary hypothesis, but it needs to be explored.
We don't actually know what the source of this infection is.
Researchers say they're waiting for China to publish the virus's genetic sequence. Like a fingerprint, it'll show if someone in China brought the virus into the market or if it arrived from Europe.
We would expect to see some transparency when the genetic sequence is available so that the rest of the world has access to that.
The science will hopefully reveal whether this is a case of global finger pointing or a new threat. Christine Burak, CBC News, Toronto.
30 European countries reopened for travel today.
But as Renee Filippone reports, the patchwork of restrictions is confusing for travelers.
After months of travel restrictions and closed borders, something new. Lineups at Berlin's airports this morning. European travel takes a tentative step forward. Safety measures are in place, but some are still anxious.
I was definitely a little bit nervous when I got into the airport because, like, when you go through security, you could tell the staff were really stressed.
It kind of seems to me that they open up really quickly because of economy and that stuff.
At this France-Belgium land crossing, travelers arrived early. Many are French bargain hunters headed to Belgium for cheap cigarettes. It's half the price, says this woman who drove 100 kilometers to save money. It's a complicated patchwork across Europe, with each country imposing its own timelines and rules about who is allowed to visit.
We call today a June 15 D-Day for tourism.
This representative of the tourism industry would have preferred a more coordinated pan-European approach.
The bubbles, the corridors, call it the bilateral, trilateral, multilateral agreements between countries are just adding more confusion and frustration.
In Italy, where borders have been open for more than a week, tourists have returned to Venice, amid protests by residents who worry things are happening too fast. As of today, Greece is welcoming tourists with a COVID-19 test on arrival. The Prime Minister wants to be cautious.
I'm not interested in making Greece the #1 destination in Europe. I'm interested in making Greece the safest destination in Europe.
Spain remains essentially closed for now, except for the island of Majorca, where a select number of German tourists are being allowed as a trial. They are basking in the sun, testing the waters of post-COVID travel. Renee Filippone, CBC News, London.
A bit of a wet spring out there, but all that means is there's more to forage and eat. A foraging expert is going to take us out into the woods next.
This next story may make you a little hungry. Good thing it's close to dinner time, or perhaps just a little more curious.
Yes, Kyle Smith is no stranger to exploring the forests outside his home. He's a professional wilderness guide and passionate naturalist.
Kyle takes you into the woods along with his dog Chilko to see what you can forage and put onto their dinner plate. Take a look.
Spring is a great time to forage around my home in Squamish, BC. It's a beautiful forest full of life. One thing that I'm always on the lookout for is fresh green leaves of miner's lettuce. They're great in salad and on a sandwich. They taste like fresh spinach leaves. The licorice fern is a fern that never grows straight out of the ground, only out of moss. It's naturally very sweet, and I use it in fresh teas. The new green growth on the tips of fir trees are great in salads and in sauces. They have a fresh, citrusy taste. Devil's Club is one of the most important medicinal plants in the rainforest. The only way to harvest Devil's Club is to remove the nasty spines. It's been used by First Nations for thousands of years to treat many different illnesses. The bark makes a great tea that kind of tastes like carrot. Oyster mushrooms are one of my favorites. After a good spring rain, you can find them growing on red alder. I love to use them in a homemade mushroom gravy sauce. Now I can't wait to get home and make some dinner.
Lots of good eats out there.
Yeah, it brings me back to my time last year hunting for morel mushrooms.
Oh, that's right. You were up north.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you got quite a bounty, if I recall.
Yeah, I got quite a few, yeah. I would like to get some more now after seeing that. Maybe fry them up in a little butter and garlic. Good to go.
Enjoy. All right, that's it for us. Dan's here at 11 after the National.
Good night.